Good afternoon. It is January 22nd. It's just after 1:30. We are here as the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, here with my colleagues, Councilmember Joando and Councilmember Fani Gonzalez. We're here to talk about the right of first refusal bill that is before us. We had a robust discussion in the late fall. We're back to discuss the remainder of it, hopefully to bring much of this to a resolution. We have the director here with us, which we appreciate. Thank you very much, Director Bruton, for joining us. And I see Ms. Kelleher is here as well, and Housing Opportunities Commission staff. We appreciate you joining us as well. Right of first refusal is an important tool in the toolkit to preservation. And the nature of the prior discussion was, how do we make sure we have a tool that works, a tool that can be implemented and executed, and a tool that does not cause unnecessary disruption to the broader market, but that will be an important way for us to move forward with critical preservation projects that the county wants to pursue. Part of that is to make sure that the county doesn't have to identify significant amounts of funding that are held up unnecessarily and are not really part of the process of buying the property, or to making the property more affordable, or to secure financing, or just really part of an administrative process, and eliminating that, and then a series of other aspects that we will go through here. So with that, unless there are any introductory comments from the director, I think we should just get into the substance of the issue. I will turn it over to council staff to walk us through the packet. Ms. McCartney-Green, appreciate you putting this together, all the moving parts here. And with that, we'll turn it over to you. We'll go through the packet, and if there are any outstanding issues beyond what are laid out by council staff in the packet, we can raise them and address them before we complete today's session. So with that, let me turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Council President. As mentioned, we had a work session on December 11th, and the committee, PHP Committee, had a very robust discussion, reviewing some of the
Yeah, I think we can go through each discussion point and take them up one by one. And then, as I mentioned, if there are any other outstanding items that the director or council members want to raise, I know there's a couple things that were raised in recent days that I just want to talk through. And if colleagues have other issues, we'll flesh those out. And then, hopefully we'll be able to get through this today, which I don't anticipate being an issue up to this point, but famous last words when we're talking about housing and land use issues. So with that, let's go through the discussion points.
Agreed. And so one of the first I'm sorry. Should I start over?
Yeah, I think we should. In the interest of, so just so everybody understands, I think that we had a microphone malfunction and council staff, I don't think could be heard on certain feeds, so we are going to start over her description of the item so that the public can follow along. So I'll turn to you, Deb.
And I'm going to move my seat because the light's not on this one, and so I can't tell. Okay. I still want to move my seat so I can see the light. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. Okay, so to reset the stage again, we had PHP had a committee work session on December 11th that outlined a few things that was in the packet. One of the things that we discussed or raised was whether or not should the county have a certain time frame to evaluate a ROFR offer and send a statement of interest. So specifically, I'm on page 4 of the packet, number 1. As mentioned, that council staff and Director Bruton, we were able to meet with Prince George's County staff to discuss their process for evaluating ROFR offers. Currently in their law, it does provide an opportunity for within 7 days of receiving that offer from the seller that they have to respond. When we talked with them, what we learned is that their program was actually defunct for a while, but when they restarted the program back up in 2020, they built in a system where staff would have to evaluate each ROFR offer that they receive using a certain qualitative method. And so that method took into consideration 4 primary categories: the geographic location of the property, the existing affordability of the property, existing restricted affordable housing, and then anything else that the county wanted to consider. It's a very thorough process. Once they've done that, they make a decision immediately. Yes, we're moving forward with the ROFR, or no, we're not. And so we talked about staffing concerns. How do they staff that? We also talked about whether or not receiving that notice of sale from the seller electronically, because that was one of the faster ways to be able to evaluate those offers. And just looking at that big picture, that was the effective process that they have. Currently in our code, we don't have that built in, and I'm not sure exactly all the factors that are considered, but just comparing Montgomery County to Prince George's County, that's why they're able to do that statement of interest so timely because of that scoring analysis. And so I want to stop there just for questions and comments.
Yeah, let's open it up. I mean, we talked quite a bit about this last time. There was a concern of whether or not this was practicable. I asked to look into the Prince George's model. They have set up a model of how they look at it. They have an initial review for key areas that they look at, and it's interest or no interest doesn't mean it's 100% going to go through. It's not binding, but I do think that it doesn't unnecessarily hold up projects that would have no likelihood of ever being seriously considered. So I'd like to hear, before turning it over to colleagues, if there are any questions from the director of what issues there would be in implementing something similar in Montgomery County to what has been implemented in Prince George's County with this initial review matrix.
Thank you very much, Council President Friedson, for the question. I'll bring up some of the things I did at the last session, plus some nuances gained from talking with Prince George's County. The biggest issue for us would be staffing. Prince George's County has approximately 1/10 of the affordable housing funding that we do. And so our staff is not just reviewing ROFRs, it's also doing all kinds of different affordable housing loans and covenants. And so they spend a significant amount more time than Prince George's County staff on that type of work. And so it would increase the workload in order to respond to all the ROFRs in a timely fashion. And so So it gets to the timeliness. Also, Prince George's County, and they acknowledge this, they have a very narrow set of criteria because they only have a certain, compared to us, because they're really trying to restart their program based on the changes they made a few years ago. They have a much smaller pool of money, and so they've been able to narrow their criteria for exercising to in order to fit with being able to exercise maybe once a year at most. And they are only able to exercise for relatively small properties given the amount of funding that they have available, whereas we have tended to exercise for much larger properties that like usually involve a more complex set of analyses. Now that said, and I know I was warned against negotiating against myself, this is not impossible for us to do. It would just be one of the things we tried to do in these ROFR amendments was to make them not have a fiscal impact because that would have required more time. And, we're trying to get this through as quickly as possible. And so if we were to say, if we needed more staff, then that would mean a fiscal impact that would take longer, and we would need to hire folks. If you all decide that it's of great enough importance to you to consider something like this and for us to take on that extra work, then I would say 7 days, especially when you consider because it says 7 days, not 7 business days, and not 7 business days without calendar, without holidays, that 7 days is too tight a turnaround, especially since we're considering larger, more complicated buildings much of the time. But that if it's very important to you, given the extra workload, then we could work with something like this, but we would need more than 7 days to responsibly, give consideration to things and turn around.
I appreciate that. To me, I think it strikes a reasonable balance. I certainly personally would be open to, say 10 business days, which would be more reasonable than 7 days, which could be 3 or 4 business days of people actually working in the office. To me, finding the right balance, it's not binding. You can set the criteria however you would like to set it. I would hope that it isn't what you suggested before, that you just send an automatic email to express interest in all of them, because it is non-binding. The purpose would be to focus everybody, including inside the department and beyond, on the actual deals that we may exercise and set a realistic expectation, into the market. I think finding the right balance of that. I hear what you're saying of the 7 days, given the amount of workload in Montgomery County being larger. But we've seen that it can work elsewhere. It might need to be calibrated. So I'll open it up to colleagues for your thoughts. There might be disagreement on this, or might be other ideas, but I guess I'm negotiating against myself here too, and saying something more like 10 business days seems like a much more a reasonable time frame based on the concerns that you noted. So I would be open to entertaining that. But let me turn it to.
I agree with you.
Okay, sure.
I agree with, I think what you're saying is very reasonable in 10 days, business days.
10 business days, so
Yes.
working days, 10 working days.
And that would, just to ask, that would not include holidays or, say, the government shutdown or something like that?
Yeah, it would have to be a business day.
Business day.
Cool, thank you.
Councilmember Joando.
Thank you. Just appreciate you and council staff digging into what happens in Prince George's. I think it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison as far as size and scope of what we're doing. So that's helpful context. So we're talking about the difference between 7 days and 60 days, right? Which is what was proposed. 10 is very close to 7. So I don't know how much of a compromise that is, given the size.
Business days are different.
Business.
Yeah.
It's much different.
What?
2 weeks. instead of 1.
Okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, 2 weeks as opposed to 1 week. Yeah, no, I get it. I think the 7 days is 1 week, which is which It's 7 days would basically be 1 business week or 5 business days, give or take. And so we're talking about 2 weeks. I just want to make sure you can actually do it, right? You know, like I know you'll make it work, and once you get into it, if you have to because last time you said to us you would just to make sure you could evaluate it, you had time because the clock was on, you would just issue a ton of letters or communications just so you would reserve your right. I don't think any of us want you to have to do that, right? We want it to be based on what would be realistic. And so, you know, I'm really deferring to you. I mean, you know, of where I am on this, do you need a little more time than that? Like, what would actually make sense for what you're trying to accomplish, which I think is largely the same thing of all of us want to accomplish, that you have time to evaluate and then issue within a reasonable amount of time. So is 10 business days enough?
I would always like more, just because it's always difficult to. There are always many different things happening, because sometimes we've had 3 closings happening in the same week, and if you have that going on, everybody's all hands on deck, and it's very hard to kind of dig in a little, because it's not just what's in the ROFR packet that you're looking at. We usually send somebody out to the property to scope it out, take a look. We check with code to see what kind of, what's the code enforcement history on the property to give an indication of deferred maintenance. And so it's not always just
Not as simple.
plug and play by numbers kind of thing, because the numbers can be very different than going out and looking at a property,
Sure.
seeing, like rusty air conditioners and shaky balconies and stuff like that.
So would 30 days be better?
Well, 30 days would be better. I mean, I leave it up to you all to negotiate, but yeah, I mean, 30 days would be better.
That would be more like 3.5 business weeks, right? Ish, right?
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, I think the difference between 30 and 14 is we will, if there's a chance that we might be interested, then we will send out a notification of interest. It would be only if it was just extremely obvious that we would, consider sending out. And I don't know what would qualify as extremely obvious. We'll have to figure that out. But and I don't want to be, kind of a knee-jerk reaction. If you all make us do this, we're just going to send out a note for every one of them.
Yeah, no, of course.
And there will be, if you all want us to do this, there will be kind of a period, like a break-in period for us to figure out.
You could always send it earlier.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so you could send it, this is what we're setting is the maximum window, right? So we're either forcing you to speed up at a level that you're not comfortable with because you're not sure of the things, or we're setting, because if say it's said 30 days, you could still do it within 10 business, like if you were ready to go, right? So that would be my only concern. I don't think it's really a philosophical thing. I just literally want to make sure you have enough time to evaluate it, and in a focused way, which you've committed to doing.
Yeah,
So
I can give you an example. I mean, we recently received a ROFR notice for a fairly decent-sized property, and we received that on the 12th of January. And that was the Friday before a weekend. And then when we got back, it takes us a little time we're still trying to set up a meeting with the contract purchaser to evaluate what their intent is, because that sometimes gets in, if their intent is to say, tear down the building and remove affordability versus an affordable housing developer who's the contract purchaser and wants to preserve it, that's a much easier decision. We also, this week, we have someone going out to the property because we need to negotiate with the owner of the property to get access to walk. We don't just show up and say, we're going to wander around. So it takes all of these things take a little time to do. It's not just
prior to issuing your
Yeah.
letter of whether you want to exercise the ROFR right.
Right.
Which is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're doing it like PG County, Prince George's County,
Or just Prince George's.
then they're just looking at it a very strict kind of thing, and they're just doing it by the numbers because they only have a certain amount to spend, and they can only spend for a certain size building. Then it's a little easier to go by the numbers as compared to going out and walking the property, having a meeting with the contract purchaser, getting those kinds of things going.
So yeah, I would prefer to, it sounds like the director is very nicely saying he'd like a little more time. So
We gave him one more time. We doubled
Well,
it to 2 weeks.
you gave him 5
So
more
it's
days.
30 days what you're.
Yeah,
putting forward? Okay.
yes.
I'll just say I appreciate where you're coming from. Again, I don't think this is a huge philosophical difference. It's we're talking about two different things. I just want to be clear, and we're mixing them into the same thing. The way that the 7-day dynamic in Prince George's is, it's a non-binding expression of interest. It's not moving forward with actually carrying out the full diligence and, process that you would to determine, all the various elements of this and whether or not you're going to commit resources, et cetera. That initial piece is supposed to, be a mesh net from my perspective to get rid of all the ones that you really have no interest in moving forward on, which the reality is we can't be in a situation where we're prioritizing every single building sale. Like, I think if we're not already doing that as things are coming in a relatively short period of time, we will never be able to implement a successful ROFR program. So if in 2 weeks, 2 working weeks, we can't come up with a scenario where we know what's worth spending a lot of staff resources on and, having meetings and doing due diligence on and what's not, then to me, we've got bigger problems from my perspective. And it's my experience that if we give a certain period of time, the department is going to use every last bit of that time. The idea that they're going to come forward in a very quick period of time, even though they have a lot of leeway, everybody has lots of things to do, and you put off the things that you don't have a deadline on and you prioritize the things that you do. So I originally thought 7 days was fine. I'm hearing from the department that that's tight. I think 10 business days as opposed to 7 calendar days seems reasonable to me. It sounds like we have a 2-to-1. I think Councilmember Jawando prefers 30 days.
Well, I'd prefer it's at 60 now. 30 is cutting it in half. 10 is cutting it in a sixth, or 5/6. So whatever. So I just prefer that what I'm hearing from the department. But yes, I prefer a longer one. I propose 30 days that could be put in the packet for full council. And I think, it's clear that, you're going to do your best under whatever. If you have to just put the letters out, you put the letters out. I'm just trying to avoid the thing where you get 5 or 6 things that come in a period and you don't have time. What I'm hearing you say is you don't want to exercise your right of the ROFR if you don't have a little bit of diligence before.
Well, extra to get to the parsing that I think the President.
Or express interest.
Yes,
Excuse me.
There's
Express interest.
there's multiple levels of threshold here, and I think we're kind of conflating them because I think it's important. We're not limiting from 60 to 30 to 10. Right now, there is no initial screening process. And the question of whether it would be appropriate to let folks know early on in the process, we're not even considering that. You don't have to wait 60 days to, for us to let you know that we're not even thinking about this. We're not thinking about this. If we are thinking about this, it's an expression, it's a notice to say, just so you know, we're looking into this. That's what we're talking about. That's what Prince George's does. It just allows for the projects that are not going to be part of this, that are not being considered of this, to know where they are in that. It allows those who are under consideration to know that this is a possibility, which I think is a reasonable information for a contract buyer to be aware of and a seller to be aware of, that there is a ROFR process that is underway and the county is considering its option of whether or not to exercise its ROFR right. So
I think you mentioned something important. So because it can be confusing for folks, I think we're talking about here the pre-screening process. The pre-screening process, if I'm going to do it or not, is going to be 10 working days. So on Monday was Martin Luther King Day, so that's not a working day. On Tuesday, there was a snowstorm. Nobody worked. So that day doesn't count. So 10 working days for the pre-screening process. And it should be listed that way so it's not confusing to anybody. That's it.
Councilmember Jawando with the final word on this.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I want to make sure that the 60 days is still running.
Yes.
Correct.
So it's running no matter what.
Right.
So, whether it's 10 business days or 30, the clock is running.
It's non-binding.
Yeah.
Non-binding letter. And so,
But it gives them an idea of whether you're interested. And what I've heard is like, before we even say we're interested, we want to kick the tires. It's a matter of how you approach it. So we'll see how it works out, but the clock is still running. Yes, go ahead.
One thing I would, if you all decide to vote to go through with this change, one thing I'd like to make sure is that it mirrors the language about the completeness of the ROFR packet, because sometimes we get ROFR packets that are incomplete. And so it would have to be, just like the language in there, it would have to be a complete ROFR packet before that time happens, because a lot of times landlords leave things.
10 business days following the receipt of a complete ROFR package.
That's perfect.
Or, okay, so do you want to be reflected? I just want to be respectful of your.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's 2-1. I mean, I'm less, he wants more time, so I'm going with that.
So, Councilmember Jawan, just for the purpose of the packet, 30 days was what was, or you just don't, 2-1 vote to change? I mean,
Yeah, I advocated for a longer period of time, suggested 30 days, sure.
Okay. All right, just want to help staff to develop the packet and avoid having to come back.
Can I read it to the record just to?
Sure, please, yep,
And we had it in the prior packet, but
yeah,
with the discussion now.
please.
And so within 7 business days, I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
Correct. Within 10 business days after the receipt of a complete offer by an owner under subsection B2, the county must make an initial evaluation whether it's interested in exercising its right of first refusal or assign its right to a qualified designated entity and then notify the owner of its decision in writing.
Had a little trouble following that, but we can.
Okay, this is.
That sounded right, but if you want to
Just
talk to your team and look at it and make sure, and if there are any clarifying.
as long as it maintains that distinction between statement of interest and, notifying about exercise.
Yes, this is just saying initial evaluation whether.
Sure.
And so, yes, that's the.
Okay,
This is
so
the.
you'll clarify to make sure that it reflects, this is a statement of interest. This is not an exercise, like a formal exercise, a non-binding statement of interest.
Yes.
So we just want to make sure that it reflects that this is a non-binding statement of interest, to Councilmember Jawando's point, that the exercising of the ROFR deadlines are not changed based on our decision here.
That's the
Final word.
It's binding in the sense that you have to do it. And if you don't do it, then what happens?
Well, that's.
If it's a business day 11 and the letter and the interest hasn't been signaled, what happens?
We would prefer that you include electronic email notification, because we don't want to we don't want to have to pay for a courier, and we don't want to have to be, a letter received in the mail, because if we have to mail it, then that cuts down on our time.
We're going to get to the electronic piece, but all notifications under this bill, I believe there should be an option for electronic. And we're going to get to that, but it's an important point on all sides, I believe, too.
Right, and then I guess to get to the fullness of what you're trying to achieve, if we state that we're not interested, then the obvious corollary is the sale can move forward.
Right.
Yeah,
The sale actually can't move forward because the tenants still have theirs.
right.
So, I mean, that's one of the complicating things in this, because even if you all have us down to 10 days, the tenants still have their time. And until 45 days passes, and if a tenant is going to register the tenant association, they still can't move forward.
Good point.
All right. Well, it would be helpful for the tenants to know if you're exercising too, if that's, part of it. So I think that helps as well. So it would give 2 triggers to folks to understand what is being exercised, or the intent of whether or not it's being pursued to be exercised.
But my question was, if you don't register your intent but in 10 business days, do you then forfeit your right under the letter of this language? I think you do.
Yeah, I agree. That seems to be the.
Which is a dramatic change from what the current law is. Right now you could do it up to 60 days, theoretically.
Because this is a non-binding notice, and I really want to stress that part, even if the department says, we're not, and then decides on the 15th day, wait up, we are, it does not lock them into that. And so
So you're saying it doesn't matter?
Well, what I'm saying is that it's a statement of interest, right? And that's just,
Could change
that's
on
60
day 11?
if the department comes back and says, hey, when we did our calculations or analysis, realized that we've missed something, they could be able to come back and say, we want to exercise our
Can I make a suggestion? I don't want to get into a back and forth, dynamic here. Like, we have a committee recommendation, 2-1. It's going to be reflected as such. If you could follow up on the question that Councilmember Jawando has posed and circle back to the committee prior to the full council work session of the question of what happens if this is not met and what is the nature of the non-binding.
Well, I mean,
element.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, it's critical to my vote. Like if it
already voted against
if
it.
it truly is non-binding, and it's like we're advising you to within 10 business days, then I'm okay with it. If you can still exercise it on day 15, like council staff suggested, then fine. So I think that's a really important question that cuts to the core of the issue.
Well, if you'd like to abstain from your vote pending this information, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, I would like to do that.
Okay, so it's 2-0 with one abstention, and you'll circle back to us, and if Councilmember Jawando, in light of the answer to that question, he will decide how he wants to handle moving forward. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's move on to item 2.
And so should the department transfer ROFR offers, one of the things that we discussed at our prior meeting is currently the seller is required to send a copy of the ROFR offer to the designated qualified entities. There's a conversation or discussion of whether or not DHCA should be in that role and be the author of receiving them and then sending them out to those designated entities. And so that's up here for discussion again, and whether or not there's a vote to change that language.
Director?
I could give an answer contingent on 3. If
You want to take that one up first? I mean,
Well,
I think I know where this is going to head, but I think it's a fair point. You want to? Why don't we just talk about them both? So share your thoughts. I'm comfortable taking them up both if colleagues are. So we'll take up 2 and 3 together.
Thank you. If the owner is required to send the ROFR packet to us electronically, then we're okay transmitting the ROFR packet to the qualified entities. What we don't want to do is to get a ROFR packet and
Pay for 12 couriers.
or to then have to or PDF everything, and that's what we don't. But if everything is electronic, that's okay.
Sounds good. So without objection, then, the preference of the department, because we talked about this at length last time, and the preference was if you could do it, their interest seemed clear to do it. Keep the electronic language. The department will handle distribution to the qualified entities. And so the private sector, nonprofit, contract purchaser and seller, the responsibility would be for them to transmit to DHCA, and then DHCA would distribute from there. Councilmember
Are we
Jawando?
using the language in the packet to the extent the email is available and all that language? As long as we're using that, I think that's good.
That was my understanding.
The only issue is if they choose to send it paper-wise, then we have to do all that.
Because that's what I thought. I heard you saying you don't want them to be able to
I would
send
prefer
it.
that they not be able to, but I understand that there may be some small landlords who, I guess there's a diminishing number of small landlords who would be able to handle sending something via email, but I do realize that there may be some folks.
So I was fine with this, just to give some wiggle room to said landlord, but I think you'll get the majority of them will be electronic, which is what you want, so.
I think it would be a rare instance that you don't receive electronically. I mean, these are not landlords that own an individual unit, which is a much different class of people. These are people who own a multifamily residential property. Not all of those are huge corporate entities, but they most likely have hired a lawyer to go through the process. This is a sophisticated transaction.
There are the occasional intent with spite. Like imagine someone who pays their utility bill all with pennies. sometimes people like to gum up the works, but, it is what it is.
I'd be fine, I mean, personally, I'd be fine requiring electronic transmission, but I understand the concern of, generally, we take an equity position here that you don't want to require electronic, even if it's one person who has an issue, you want to provide an alternative means. So I don't feel strongly about that, but so I was comfortable with the language as it was. Let me yield to Councilmember Fonda Gonzalez.
Yeah, just when talking with Prince George's County, they also mentioned that electronic was probably the best way. They wouldn't be able to operate as efficiently if it came through paper mail. And so, as you mentioned, the class of people that are applying and exercising the ROFR are using counsel or being advised and sending large documents. And so electronic was the efficient way. And so that was at least what was recommended, what's being done in nearby jurisdictions.
Now, I would say, I am so sorry, but I'm going to say it must be electronic. I mean, it's a great way, it's efficient, conserves trees. It's just and if somebody has an issue, I'm sure they'll call you and maybe we can work with them. But the amount of people requesting paper, it's probably none at this point. We're just making an assumption.
Yeah,
So-
here's my suggestion. Let's require electronic, but provide a way in which they can contact the department to, provide an alternative means of transmission, including by certified mail,
At the discretion of the department.
at the discretion of the
And
department.
then that way, if somebody just
So
can't,
if there's an undue burden, if there's some issue, then that would provide you the opportunity to do it, but it would also allow you to have a guardrail against the protest action that was being done just to make it more difficult for the department, which, is not, I don't think it's common or would happen often, if ever, but it would guard against that potential. Councilmember Rwanda?
No,
That's what-
I shouldn't have said anything. I should just let the language go. Maybe you wouldn't have noticed. But no, sure. If you can draft that, I just think we're making policy for someone who's a spiteful person. There are some, I think of Quebec Terrace or a small, someone who owns a 4-unit property.
Making money.
They're making money, but some of them aren't using, maybe they're not going to be as savvy, but it's fine. I think as long as there's a way to request an alternative means, I'm fine with it. So you have to draft.
Okay, so we're going to draft the position of the committee unanimously is to allow or to require that the owner must send a copy of the offer to the department, which would then be distributed to the qualified entities electronically, and that there would be a second piece of this, that at the discretion of the director, an owner may request alternative means for transmission. Does that
that's-
work for the director, and does that work for council staff?
Yes.
Okay. So that would protect you there. Okay.
I just
Councilmember
want to ask
Joanna?
one other question too. We don't have to deal with it today, but I imagine there's many other places in the code that require certified mail for certain transactions or things. This is obviously one small subsection of the ROFR. I think if we're going to do this, we should probably look at it holistically and have some sort of overall policy, so you're not being inequitable in who's required to do this and not. Just something for the department and council staff and my colleagues to be aware of.
It's a good point, something to take a look at. I think the difference here, I think to a certain extent, is the sophistication of these transactions are different than most that are coming before the department in terms of submissions, like an annual lease or a rent notice and things of that nature. But we do require a lot of certified mail, and if this is a direction that we're going to move away from, consistency, I think, would be helpful in that regard. So I think it's a really good point for broader discussion and future discussion. Okay, I think that settles us on points 2 and 3. I think we're ready to move on to point 4.
Point 4 refers to the amending the definition of rental housing, and Councilmember Stewart, Vice President Stewart, who was here last session, proposed an amendment that would modify the definition, and I'm on page 6 of your packet. And this rental housing would not include a dwelling operated for religious or charitable purpose. And so with that, there's in your packet, there's a letter that was to support. And other than that, was generally accepted.
Yeah, the committee spoke about its interest in this. I spoke about my significant familiarity with this. It was in the district, the issue at play was in the district that I used to represent that's now represented by Council Vice President Stewart. I'll note she asked if she should attend. I said I thought her memo was sufficient, but and I thought that we had indicated our support at the last meeting, but we weren't taking formal votes. So without objection, appreciate her raising this, and we will accept that amendment.
Moving on to question 5, and this was also thoroughly discussed, whether or not the executive regulations regarding the eligibility criteria for a qualified entity, whether that should be transmitted under method 3 or method 2. The current language as introduced has method 3. The committee also discussed that they would like to have a closer look at some of the criteria that was going to be used, and I think there was a general consensus to amend that to method 2 approval.
From method 3 to method 2, we understood why that was presented in the manner in which it was, but there was agreement. So without objection, we will accept method 2 regulation in the interest of collegial and collaborative efforts. This is something that we want to be a joint effort and is a joint priority. So I think that makes the most sense. Moving on.
Yeah, so number 6 was several technical clarifying amendments, and the GHGA had worked with just outside partners and stakeholders looking at just more of a cleanup language. And so we went through these each section, so I'm not sure if we want to approve them as a bulk or if there's anyone that we want to pull out and discuss any further.
It seemed like there was broad consensus on these. Do you want to just quickly go through them, just for the interest of those who weren't watching in detail the last session? And if any colleagues have a particular issue on any one of them, let me know. If not, at the end, we'll just take it up as a block, if that works for colleagues. Please.
And so one of the recommended amendments was to include Rockville Department of Housing and Community Development as an automatic pre-qualifier. Right now, the bill defines certain pre-qualifiers in their local housing authority. Rockville Department, or GHCD, was inadvertently missing from that, so that was an oversight, so that would amend lines 7 to 12. Another thing was a recommendation to define county assignee to make sure that was clear in the law when their assignment is made. And so there's various parts throughout the bill that corrects qualified entity and replaces that with the word county assignee. Moving down to D, so clarify the good faith failure provision as introduced. The good faith deposit is refundable in the event unable to perform under the contract. GHG is proposing an amendment to modify that and narrow the reason specifically for based on the assignee's inability to secure financing. And we heard some of that through the public testimony as well. It was to make sure that that was clarified. E, clarifying the process after a failure to consummate the sale. The amendment would specify that if the sale does not close within the 180 days after the offer was accepted, the owner has the option to transfer the rental housing to any purchaser within 365 days, provided the purchase price is not less than 90% of the purchase. And then confidentiality, we know that there's various negotiations that's happening, and so another cleanup was to adhere to confidentiality in regards to any documentation received by the owner. And then I'm at G, so establish a specific deadline for the written agreement between the county and the assignee. And so this would provide written agreement within 3 business days after it selects a quantified entity to assume its purchase right. And then lastly, there was a clarifying amendment that specifies the provisions within the bill would not apply to any transactions prior to the effective date of this legislation. The transition language would preserve pending transactions that may be midstream in the ROFA process.
Yes, Director Bruton.
We might want to talk about that last one a little.
Okay. Let me see if colleagues have any other comments or questions about other items, then we'll move to discussion on that.
No.
Okay, let's move to discussion on that. Director?
So, just to clarify, this would mean that any ROFR that has been issued prior to the date the law goes into, the date that the law goes into effect, we would not be able to assign on. And so, for example, I had mentioned earlier there was an example of a ROFR that came out on January 12th because it came out prior to the date this will be voted on by council and signed by the executive. We would not be able to exercise, and we would not be able to assign. If we were to try to exercise on that property, we would still be under the current law, and we would still have to pay the full purchase.
Could I make a suggestion on that? It's a really important point. So I think we could use transition language exclusively on assignment. So to me, the purpose of this originally was contemplating new deadlines, new processes, new requirements that it would be unreasonable midstream to put in place for everybody, including the department, that I don't think could pull that off, frankly, fairly. But the assignment piece is, which, by the way, was what I had been advocating for 5 years and was the impetus behind, really rethinking the ROFR process. We've expanded that dramatically from what we originally started. But that was the key point here that I have been raising and addressing. I don't see any public concern with transition language that would allow for assignment as a transition. So the deadlines wouldn't go into place until the bill is fully implemented, but transition language that would allow for assignment for an already, I don't know how a contract agreement that already was in place.
And already received.
An already received ROFR notice.
And one other clarification on that. We would need the ability to assign without having finished the regulations on the qualified entity process. So we would need to be able to pick whichever entity we want up until the time we, had those regulations and the process in place. Otherwise, we could have that right, but then not be able to do it if we didn't have the qualified entity process.
So I think you're going to have to work with council staff, legislative attorneys, and the Office of the County Attorney to determine legally what we have the flexibility of doing, because doing it before regs may be a challenge. So I just think that's something that needs to be worked through. But my suggestion would be, if the county attorney and legislative counsel is able to work with the department to come up with a process, that there be transition language specifically focused on assignment, and that the other provisions of the bill be in place prospectively once, fully implemented.
Sure.
And I think that would address the issues that you're raising, because this was something that you had put forward as a consensus based on feedback, but upon further consideration in light of recent events, it's brought to light this assignment issue and question, and something that needs to be addressed. So it's specifically on assignment that I think needs to be narrowly focused from a transition clause perspective. Councilmember Joanda?
So is it fair to say that you all are okay, tentatively, that you all are okay with A through G, but that we leave out H, and that I should work with Ms. McCartney Green?
Council staff and the county attorney. That was going to be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, I had two questions. One, is the assignment address your concern holistically? And if it does, great. But either way, I think we should just hold on H and have you work it off and deal with that at full council. Assuming.
Yeah, I mean, yes. If there is consensus, though, in the committee and the department that the focus of the transition is around assignment, and that's the direction that we want to give the legislative attorney, the county attorney, and the director to work through, we don't have to agree on the specifics of the language and the details because we don't have it before us, but I think it would be helpful to present it in that way to colleagues. So my suggestion would be we agree on A through G. On H, we note the preference of the committee, but that more work is needed between the legislative attorney, the county attorney, and the director to come up with the transition language related to the assignment.
So I guess answering my first question, does the transition language, about would not apply to transactions prior to the effective date of the legislation, does the assignment carve out cover everything that you're concerned about with that?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. As long as we leave off H.
Yeah, reminding you that the A through H were the departments.
Yeah.
This is what they put forward. Yeah, and this brought to light a new issue related to assignment.
myself all the time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Honestly,
Fair enough. And if not, we got people to remind you when you should, right?
we came up with, because
Right.
RHE got in touch with us and had concerns,
Yeah.
and the rest were things that were suggested by industry folks.
Yeah.
And we were trying to be, as receptive, as we could to them.
That's why I asked the question.
All right, so A through G, it'll reflect unanimous support of the committee. On H, we'll note the committee's preference to put forward a transition clause related to assignment, and that the county attorney, the director, will work with council staff to work out the exact language in order to do that. But that will be the committee recommendation, once we move that forward.
Okay.
From a legislative perspective, it matters because it would not require, it would be part of the committee recommendation, which matters. It probably doesn't matter in the scheme because I think it'll have broad support, but, from a just general standpoint. Okay, are we good on item 5? We're going to move to item 6, and then we'll open it up. I have a couple additional items, and if there are any other items that need to be discussed, we can go through that as well.
The last one was a technical amendment by council staff on page 8, and that was to include that the county may assign the first right of first refusal or a contract to purchase rental housing to an entity qualified by the department to receive such an assignment. That one, you have to be demonstrating acquiring, maintaining, and managing rental affordable housing, and then 2, if it's a governmental agency, housing agency or authority, and that would include our RHE and some of the other qualified entities that were previously listed in the legislation. And so that's also a cleanup amendment there.
Yeah, just for anyone following, I said, let's move on to item 6. We're actually moving on to item 7, so I just want to be clear on page 8 in case anyone was watching, I misspoke. But technical amendment, this includes public housing agency. HOC is here watching very intently on this one, but it was intended. Currently, HOC and the department and the county have the ability to exercise ROFR, so this would just reflect that. So without objection, we'll accept that. I'll open it up to colleagues. If you have any items, I have a couple that I just wanted to bring up as discussion points that have been raised since the packet based on our prior conversation and since the prior conversation. So the first is related to the municipal aspect. So an interesting question was raised. I just wanted to raise it in public. What is our authority for right of first refusals within municipal limits of Rockville and Gaithersburg? Because we've expanded the qualified entities to Rockville Housing Enterprises as noted, and to Rockville and Gaithersburg. What is our authority to exercise within those, and what is their authority as municipal housing enterprises to exercise outside of the municipal limits?
Well, I'm not positive about the exact answers on this. I know that we have exercised ROFR on properties within the city of Rockville. And so I know that we've legally done that. Tacoma Park has its own TOPA law, and Tacoma Park has the ability itself to assign. Tenants have the right to buy, the city has the right to assign. I don't know if it's ever been exactly worked out, but in a conversation I was having with Tacoma Park staff last week, they indicated that they normally defer to the county, and that could just be practice as compared to any requirement. And they normally defer to the county, and then if the county is not going to act, then they may choose to act. we were talking about particular buildings that are, coming up for sale there and what they were thinking about doing versus what we might be able to do. And so that gets into part of the county law about, our relationship to different municipalities that I am, I am not adept at yet. And so I only like to say what I know, is right.
Okay, so yeah, we don't always exercise that on this side of the dais or downstairs, but it's generally a good idea and highly advisable, as colleagues are reminding each other here. Okay, if we could just get an answer to that question in between the work session, it was raised. It's an interesting question of assignment. Can, for instance, we assign to Rockville Housing Enterprises, and could they exercise outside the municipal limits? I don't think so. And then, yeah, please.
So that I can answer a little bit more.
Okay.
So I'll just start off with HOC. HOC already has the ability to exercise it on their own. They need no right to assign unless they want to be subservient to us, which I'm guessing they don't. That said, Rockville Housing Enterprises is a quasi-governmental entity, and this actually came up when they were considering a property that was a block outside of the city of Rockville. And I asked them, can you own this property because it's outside the city's jurisdiction? And they would not own it as Rockville Housing Enterprises. They would purchase it as a partnership with another entity and own it as as an LLC. And so they are able to do that. Granted, that does bring up the specter, because that, it always makes you wonder about, because there are certain things, as far as I understand in the law, that Rockville could, what's the word I'm looking for? When you take over something,
Eminent domain?
Not eminent domain, but when they could vote to
Annex.
Yes, they could vote. Thank you.
We have dealt with annexation specifically related to affordable housing projects, specifically related to Rockville and Gaithersburg at times. So, okay. Well, it would be helpful to just lay this out, and maybe we could just include in the packet a reference to it. I don't think it requires a significant amount of discussion. I don't think it's a decision point, because I don't think we need to make any adjustments based on what was just shared, but I think it'd be helpful. It was asked by a few people, some stakeholders and folks. So I think it would be helpful just for understanding to have in one place where they're looking. A question came about, we have dealt with the issue in the department's items in item 6 with deposits and refunding, and what are the reasons by which something falling through is legitimate and not. We focused on financing not coming through, which makes a lot of sense to me. An issue was raised of whether or not a contract buyer who, the seller is still selling, so they're still getting compensated at the value of their asset. The contract buyer is not getting compensated at all. They are being moved aside, and the county or some entity is stepping in. The question is, what, if any, consideration for costs associated with their side of it would the county be responsible for? In terms of reimbursement, since
under the current ROFR law and every opportunity to purchase program in the country, they are given no compensation. They could theoretically say, if they have done environmental studies or things like that were part of the pre-development process, they could theoretically sell that. That happens sometimes. So just more for the public. But if you're selling a multifamily property and you put it out on the market, you're going to have, at best circumstance, you're going to have several developers interested. They're going to spend some money figuring out if they want to, put something down. And the owner may negotiate with a few different contract purchasers. And if they're not the chosen one, that's pre-development money, or like that they lose. That's part of the speculative business of like engaging in real estate. And sometimes in those situations, I can think of one in particular that happened last year, where a contract purchaser ended up pulling out, nothing to do with Rover, contract purchaser ended up pulling out on a property, and another possible purchaser approached them about buying some of their
Remediation and other.
like the
studies
studies
of.
the studies that they had done.
Okay. So the answer is nothing, and that is common practice in these situations. So that was the answer I thought you were going to say, but I just thought it should be noted publicly. We have a question about exempting LIHTC properties, a property that's being taken under LIHTC, of whether or not that would be fully, like, automatically exempted. Could you just speak to that? This came from Montgomery Housing Alliance, Affordable Housing Coalition.
Sure. So they came to me, to DHCA, with the suggestion of this exemption. I'll give you a little background. Low-income housing tax credit properties, you don't get low-income housing tax credit as part of when you're purchasing the property. So in a ROFR situation, you would, or just a normal situation, you would buy the property after a certain number of months or a certain number of years, depending. You would, if the state grants you low-income housing tax credits, you would set up a new ownership entity with the tax credit investor. This is some kind of corporate entities that's looking to get the federal tax credits. And in setting up that new tax credit ownership entity, you have to transfer the ownership of the property from the development entity, the LLC that they bought the property with, to this new partnership. And that kind of transfer, or sale, if you want to look at it that way, that triggers opportunity to purchase or right of first refusal programs. I'm actually really familiar with what they brought to us because I helped write the legislation that created a similar exemption in DC. This came about in DC because during the pandemic, the district passed legislation that told the TOPA process, meaning that if you submitted a TOPA notice, the clock didn't start ticking until the public health emergency was over. And so that stopped the sale of properties, but there were certain affordable housing developers that might have had adverse circumstances if they had had to wait another year or two for their transfer from one ownership entity to this LIHTC entity. And so with very specific restrictions, we got passed an amendment to the TOPA law there that allows this type of LIHTC transfer, which is really kind of a fictive sale because you're transferring it to yourself plus a partner for a very specific purpose that's an affordable housing purpose, to happen without triggering TOPA, or in this case, triggering ROFR. Now, in the district, they have something called a notice of transfer. So if you are making a sale or a transfer of a property from one entity to another, you have to issue a notice of transfer that the tenants or the District of Columbia government can object to. You can't just say, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm exempt, trust me. You have to send justification. And so what I advised them on was that if they put in provision that no less than 90 days before they were, requesting to do this transfer, they had to send proof of the transfer, demonstrating that this is actually what it was, the partnership documents, those kinds of things, to the department, and then the department would say yay or nay on it, and if we said, yes, you're doing as outlined in the kind of complicated amendment, then yes, you don't have to issue a right of first refusal notice, and you can just move forward with this transaction.
Okay, I'm trying to follow. So we have language that we received from them. Does the language reflect your suggestion?
As long as it's the same language they sent to us. Okay.
Okay, so,
Oh, I can compare it with, like, I can compare it after the fact. I mean, like, it would just be, like, just in case somebody made a typo or something. But it should be fine.
they sent it to all of us.
Like,
All
Could
right,
you,
so,
if you could just hand it to me, just to make, I can take a look and.
I have the memo. I don't have the actual, so I don't think the memo is reflective of their.
Oh, sorry, this doesn't have the exact language.
Yeah, that's just the memo of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, I will trust that they, in good faith, got the transcription of the exemption stuff from.
well, we don't have it in front of us. I'll just note, I am supportive of the language as has been proposed. This is a preservation program. That's what ROFR is at its heart. The idea that we would hold up certain preservations in order to get them into another preservation program seems somewhat penny wise and pound foolish. Working out any logistical issues as you have with them makes sense. So I think in the packet, I would like it to no committee vote because we don't have it before us. I don't think it's appropriate for us to formally vote on it, but we can express support. I'll personally express support and just ask that this be presented, the language as agreed upon between the director and council staff be forwarded to the council for an actual vote.
But I will say in the language, there are limitations on how far into the LIHTC process. So you couldn't do something like this if you were contemplating a sale toward the end of a LIHTC, a LIHTC compliance period. So this is really to get at, you bought a property and you have to do you have to create this LIHTC entity and you have to transfer it in order to set that up. Is that?
Yeah. Okay. So I
very
don't know if colleagues want to also reflect that this is a committee view.
yeah, I just
It's a personal view. But I don't think we should vote on it because we don't have the language in front of us. And so I just want to be respectful of that. Although I have seen the language, I'm supportive of the language. It was sent to us via email, but it's not included in the packet. If we could include that in the council packet as an additional vote beyond the committee, but note the discussion in committee about the issue and the agreement from the department on the issue. Councilmember Fana Gonzalez.
I just want to say on the record that I read the language and I'm completely in support, so.
Okay, so we'll note the committee's support, but that the language wasn't in front of us and that it would be, it would be voted on by the full council. But I think it's important that it be actually in the packet. So let's just make sure we include that as part of the committee discussion and then include it in the packet. Okay, we had talked previously. I just want to raise and see on whether or not on the tenant right to purchase, whether there should be any thresholds on that, either the age of the property, the per unit cost, the purchase price, or whether or not this would be for any property in the county. It's something that has been raised of whether or not it's realistic for a tenant purchase, even an assignment on units with significant amount of MPDUs, for instance, and a 5 or 7 year old building with a huge number of units that would be difficult to finance, for instance. So I just raise that here to see if there's any interest to narrow the focus of the tenant provision or whether or not we want to keep it as is.
I'd like to keep it as is. I think if it's a possibility, it's a possibility, but I don't think it's going to get in the way. We already have the timelines. Just, so that would be my preference.
I agree. I'm going to keep it the way it is.
Okay, so no support for restricting that at the committee. And then we just had a couple other discussion points. The bill timeline transition language, do you want to speak to that? We currently have this as an emergency bill that we have thoughtfully, methodically gone through because it's extremely complicated, and we have already talked about the transition language specifically related to the assignment. So I think we have covered that aspect. I think the only outstanding question here as a discussion point is whether or not this should still remain an expedited bill or not, or whether it would go into effect 91 days after its passage. So there would have to be a,
Well, the bill came over from the CE, so I know that it was expedited. I just wanted to make sure, is there any reason or substantial reason to keep it like that, or?
As we talked about earlier, there may be ROFRs that we want to, use the assignment and other things on. And so, yes, the sooner the bill gets passed, the sooner we can, do these sorts of things.
all right, we have slowed down the expedited bill, but it's going to be expedited enactment. Even though it wasn't an expedited legislative process, which is not always such a bad thing because we've gone through thoughtfully some of these issues, and I think we've gotten to a better place than where this started. The question of any changes to the fiscal impact, I think the only question would be on implementation, but we've gone electronic, so hopefully that has, there have been puts and takes on the staff burden here, but hopefully we're landing in a similar place. If anything changes that you want to share with us between now and full council session, open season on that, but I think we've largely covered it in discussion.
If that 10 days ends up changing things, we'll come back to you in FY26.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Sounds good. Unless there is anything from colleagues, unless there's anything from council staff or the director, I think that covers all of the discussion points. All right, final discussion is whether or not we want to forward the bill and recommend approval of this bill to the full council. All in favor, raise your hand. As amended, raise your hand. So we're going to forward this along with the one additional discussion point about transition clause and assignment and the additional LIHTC provision. So there's.
I just need my answer so I can decide whether I'm with the committee or on my own.
And then a decision point, and then a couple other just clarifying aspects, including the municipal interface here. With that, thanks everybody for your thoughtful consideration and participation. Thank you to HOC, which has been an active participant in a lot of these discussions and is certainly a key partner in exercising ROFR and in the preservation of housing in the county. And with that, colleagues, we are adjourned.